Measurement 1. In this lecture, I will start the sequence in which I discuss issues to do with the second big theme of the course, measurement in the social sciences. The lecture has 4 parts. First, I will talk about the idea of concepts and conceptualization. Secondly, I will talk about the practice of measurement. Thirdly, I will discuss the validity and reliability of measures. The fourth and briefest section begins the discussion of measurement error, and I will continue with this theme in the next lecture. Concepts without percepts are empty. Percepts without concepts are blind. So said Immanuel Kant. Undoubtedly, he had no inkling of the relevance of his aperçu for the empirical social sciences. However, it is very relevant. If I were to invite you to go out into the world and observe, you might well look at me in a puzzled way and ask, "Observe what?" The world is complex and multifaceted, and we have to have some conceptual apparatus that allows us to pick out and mentally organize the bits of it that will be useful for whatever purposes we have in mind. So observation presupposes a framework of conceptualization in order to identify what is relevant. Likewise, at least for a social scientist, conceptualization without matching empirical content is likely to be unsatisfying. Given our aim is to find out something about the world, the finest logic-chopping conceptual distinctions are going to be barren unless they're exposed at some point to the friction that is generated by coming up against external reality. Of course, the meeting of concepts and reality will not necessarily always lead to enlightenment. As Albert Einstein put it, "I don't try to imagine a personal God. It suffices to stand in awe at the structure of the world, insofar as it allows our inadequate senses to appreciate it." The point is that we always observe reality through the medium of our senses, and then via the techniques of measurement that we apply. What we end up with in our data is at several removes from reality itself. Data, singular datum, literally means something that is given. When we receive it, it has already gone through a process of mediation. That, of course, does not mean that it has no connection with the underlying reality. Our aim is for as close a correspondence as possible. Nevertheless, we should not confuse the measurements we make with the reality itself. Simple visual illusions illustrate that what is given, the data, can itself be ambiguous and pose amusing problems for our brain to decode. Are you looking at a duck or a rabbit? An old crone or a young lady? 2 faces or a candlestick? These illusions work because there is insufficient information in the pictures themselves to allow the brain to categorize them unambiguously as one thing or another. The result is that the brain flips interpretations without conscious control. It is a duck and a rabbit, and there's no way to choose between these 2 ways of seeing it. Unlike the natural world, the fabric of the social world doesn't even appear to be cut up into discrete pieces or objects. We have to do the cutting up ourselves, while at the same time taking care not to do it in a completely arbitrary way. Plato talks of carving nature at its joints. The point of our concepts is to identify where those joints are so that the measurement can do the carving. I can make a simple point about the importance of measurement with the story of Aristarchus of Samos. A.R. Burns, in his History of Greece, tells us that at some time between 280 and 265 BC, Aristarchus put forward a heliocentric theory of the universe. He apparently had a hard time persuading anyone that it was true. The reason that he didn't cause a scientific revolution 1700 years before Copernicus is that he couldn't support his theory with sufficiently precise observations and measurements. Copernicus and Kepler took up Aristarchus's theoretical cause, but the big breakthrough, as far as the empirics were concerned, was Galileo. But perhaps that's enough about astronomy. This is, after all, a lecture for sociologists. So let's see what Paul Lazersfeld, one of the most influential American sociologists of the 20th century, has to say on the matter. The social scientist, he says, finds himself in continuous effort to combine two ideals, vision and precision. Clearly, he needs precise instruments if he wants to develop testable propositions, but the social world is very complex and doesn't provide us with the well-defined objects from which the natural sciences start. Thus, he also needs a great deal of creative imagination, of vision, to decide on the objects about which such propositions should be developed. Again, the point is that the objects under observation are not self-evident and just given to us. We, the investigators, decide what we will observe, which aspects are important and which unimportant, and how we will carry out the observation. Concepts are the building blocks of our theories. They're abstractions, existing only in our heads. They can, though they needn't be, expressions of ideas that exist in everyday discourse, where usage may be relatively imprecise. If a concept does not coincide with lay usage, that does not invalidate it. In everyday life, people use the term social class in all sorts of ways, often in fact without giving any thought at all to the actual content. It's a kind of verbal hand-waving that possibly signifies information content within a certain social context, but outside of that context conveys very little that is precise. When people are asked to say what they mean by social class, a common response is to reference other concepts: education, income, accent, type of housing, or even things like deference and snobbishness that sociologists would actually see as markers of social status. For some questions, the lay definitions may be of relevance. For others, they may be quite irrelevant. We, as investigators, can define social class in any way we like that will be useful for the purpose that we have in mind. It's unlikely that people in general think about social class, in as far as they think about it at all, in terms of things like monitoring difficulty, or human asset specificity, or exiting a game with a share of assets, or in terms of contradictory locations within social relations. But all of these ideas form part of influential conceptualizations of social class in the sociological literature. Social classes don't exist. Human beings, with all their trays and their social relationships with each other, do exist. We use concepts like social class to organize our experience of these relationships, communicate it to others, and explain it. The concepts themselves are second-order things. They're the filter which enables us to organize our thoughts. It is completely meaningless to argue about whether a concept is right or wrong, or has been correctly or incorrectly defined. What matters is whether the content is logically coherent and whether it is useful for the purpose that it is intended to serve. Here is a list of social science concepts. I'll leave it to you as an exercise to consider the variety of ways in which one might sensibly define their content. Conceptualization is the process of identifying and clarifying concepts. But as Kant implies, it would be a pretty poor sort of social science that stopped at that point. Somehow, these concepts have to be made to rub up against the real world, and to do that, we have to think about operationalization. This is the specification of observable phenomena that indicate either the presence or absence of the thing that we're interested in. For example, is this object or is it not a case of bureaucracy, or mental illness, or distress, or loneliness, aggression, or social solidarity? We might also think about things in terms of the strength or weakness of a disposition or characteristic. How left-wing, neurotic, intelligent, distressed is this particular person? Or how bureaucratic, hierarchical, or total is this organization? What we're talking about here are things which are a matter of degree, rather than black and white, present or absent. Once we've thought about the indicators, we still need to go further down the ladder of abstraction in order to specify the precise instruments that we're going to use in order to make measurements of the indicators.